All right. Good morning again, everyone. We're really glad that you're here with us today. Today, we'll be talking about our final check-in for strategies for Giving Tuesday. It's just a few weeks away. I am Susie Lee. I'm the Director of Programs at Forefront. And here with me today is my colleague, Lily. We are going to dig into a lot today. What we're planning for this conversation is really to be a conversation. So we have a couple of things that we have known in Illinois and across the country have been really successful strategies for folks. So we want to make sure we cover those bases, but it's definitely going to be a little bit of a choose your own adventure. So looking at our agenda today, again, just kind of checking in about that conversation. We definitely want folks to be involved. So we'll be starting with a few check-in opportunities with all of you. We really invite folks to come off of mute and speak into the room. If you're more comfortable in chat, that's okay. If you'd like to be visible on camera, that'd be great. We actually have a really nice size group of folks here to have a great conversation. Once we get our check-in, we'll definitely be moving into kind of the meat and potatoes, or for vegetarians, your maybe rice and beans option. We'll dig into some 2020 context numbers. As I mentioned, those baselines for success that we've seen have been really useful to folks across the state and across the country. Timelines for communication. There's still a lot that can be done in the few weeks we have remaining. Peer-to-peer fundraising is a huge opportunity. If you're familiar with it, if you're not familiar with it, we'll be covering sort of the basics and then opening up for conversation for sure. And then we have a whole list of other topics that we're just going to open up and say, who wants to talk about this? So that's going to be kind of our plan for today. I also want to mention again, if you have questions at any time, feel free to throw those into the chat. Lily and I will both be keeping an eye on it. And there we go. All right. So checking in with all of you just as human beings today with us in this virtual room. What allows you to feel like your best self? This can be at work, during projects. It can be just in life in general. We just want to hear from you all. And Lily, do you want to break the ice and share what allows, I didn't give you warning on this. So do you want to share what allows you to feel like your best self?
At least 30 minutes of like uninterrupted time with myself and a cup of coffee in the morning is pretty much like the key to a good rest of the day. Doesn't have to be coffee, just taking that intentional time for me in the morning.
That coffee is definitely necessary for me personally in the morning, but I love that little bit of time for intentionality for yourself. Anyone else want to share something that you start the day with, or what allows you to feel like your best self?
Feel free to share that in the chat too if you aren't able to unmute yourself. Making sure I get at least 9 hours of sleep.
That's a good one.
Thanks, Tiernan. Yeah, that's a tough one. Serena said, listening to a podcast on my drive to work. Any particular kind? Do you try to get in the work zone, or do you try to listen to non-work related things? Anything fun in pop culture?
Nice. I like it. I am coming to you from my work office, which is like a 3-foot by 6-foot space in the corner of my bedroom. And so I miss actually my commute a little bit because I would also listen to what was going on. Yeah, music in the morning, some podcasts, sometimes the news, usually not. But yeah, that little time to just listen to ideas from somebody else's head. I miss that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, well, I promise this is going to come around to our point for the day. So feel free to keep throwing things in the chat about what makes you feel like your best self. This one's a little bit more of a rhetorical question. We had a really phenomenal speaker from the NAP ministry based in Atlanta 2 years ago at Forefront's annual event. And ever since then, I've been really, really thinking about the words that she said of how important rest is, not just sleeping at night, but taking a break during the day, walking away from your computer, the space to think, and in sort of the bigger picture, not just what's the next thing I have to get done, the next thing I have to get done, the next thing I have to get done. Ever since we had that presentation about rest, I've really seen a lot of articles coming out talking about how much human beings need to have play in their day. And they talk about playtime for kids, but adults need playtime too for our mental capacity to be at its best. Tiernan and I see that you saw that presentation. Thank you. That was a really phenomenal presentation. I'm glad you got to join us in that. So like I said, this one is a little bit more of a rhetorical question because I know it can be definitely a hard one. I have a toddler here at home, so finding space for rest is a big challenge, but I wanted to put that out there. While we're talking about final checklists and rushing to the big day, this is still really important to us as human beings and to our organizations and having a successful campaign. All right, so digging in a little bit, so starting to bring this full circle to our topic today. Last year around in the wintertime, there was a neighborhood group here where I live that was working with the homelessness issue, which was increasing in need in our community in particular. And I remember being aware that that the need was increasing and feeling really overwhelmed and not really knowing what to do. And then I saw these on our neighborhood page talking about what this group was actually doing. And I had this moment where they were saying, you know what, there are a lot of needs here. One thing for sure, there are people that are going to be out in the cold. We need more blankets. And I had this moment where I just thought, I can help with that. And I think about that a lot with Giving Tuesday because we know the types of folks that are most likely to give on Giving Tuesday tend to be younger donors, tend to be folks who are giving smaller amounts. They're not usually major donors on Giving Tuesday. And they really like to think about, even if they're not actually giving a tangible gift, the idea of the dollar amount that I'm giving means something. It is something that helps in a concrete way. And so helping to create whatever your Giving Tuesday campaign is, or any digital giving campaign that you've got, being able to provide a moment where someone in the public can see your message and think, I can help with that, is really, overall, that's the thing that we're all going for. All right. So I apologize if you hear my dog grumbling in the background. She's just waking up. But we are all going to take just a moment, not fall asleep, but just a moment to breathe before we really dive into the checklist and think about, we're following with our hearts, but taking our brains with us, whether that means carving out time for rest, carving out time for moments. So I'd just like everybody to take a moment. If you'd like to close your eyes, I'm going to go on mute myself just for about 30 seconds and think about what I want to get out of this time together. For me, it's of course being able to share as much helpful information as possible, but for all of you, please think about what it is that you're hoping to get out of today's conversation. So just a moment to think and be in this space right here and let go of the to-do lists for everything that is next. All right. And if you'd like to share what it is, the big question or the big idea that you're hoping to get out of today, if you'd like to share that in the chat, that'd be really great. It'll help us shape our comments in the next few minutes. And if not, you can just hold on to that, and that's all right too. All right, so let's dig in to the program itself. We're talking specifically about strategies for Giving Tuesday. At Forefront, I think some of you are very familiar with our work. There are a couple of names I'm not recognizing. So if there are folks that are not familiar, just a really quick recap. Giving Tuesday started in 2012, and Forefront got involved as one of the very first statewide campaigns supporting Giving Tuesday back in 2014. We did this because we knew that digital giving, that folks making donations online, was increasing exponentially year after year after year, and it has continued to do so. Giving Tuesday was, when it was new, a huge opportunity to really communicate that out to the nonprofit community, to the grant maker community, to talk about this opportunity of connecting with folks in a different way than we have traditionally. Mailers are still super important. All the other campaigns still have their place for sure. But we know that digital giving continues to grow and is of huge importance to nonprofits being successful and connecting with that next generation of donors that will become, hopefully, your major donors. So fast forward to today, Forefront doesn't focus as much. We don't host a statewide campaign like we used to, if you were familiar with the I'll Give campaign from a few years back. But we really focus on digital giving still year round. And of course, as I mentioned, Giving Tuesday is still a huge, huge part of that. So today we'll focus on Giving Tuesday as part of digital giving in a year-round campaign. So just a couple of numbers from the 2020 results, if folks haven't had a chance to dig through this report. I was really particularly impressed with the number of people in the US that participated. There was actually a 23% increase in the number of folks that either made donations or volunteered or gave things on Giving Tuesday compared to 2019. And I think, you know, for years we've talked about the myth of giving fatigue, that while an individual, of course, has a limit of how much they can make donations, our society is so far from a limit of how much generosity we're able to provide to the community. So that idea that there is donor fatigue, that communities are just going to be completely tapped out. In actuality, all of the studies that have been done after natural disasters, after Giving Tuesday, have shown that society has never remotely reached that point. So we keep making our asks, even when the need is great, especially when the need is great, because we know generous people are generous and they're going to give if they have the ability to give. And they only have the ability to give if they know what you need. So it's a whole circle.
Can I add something to that, Susie?
Of course.
I guess maybe just to drive that point home, for those of you who are aware that Giving Tuesday, the entity also held a spring fundraising event called Giving Now. These numbers are exclusive to that. So in case you were curious, this is not an accumulation of the full year. This is in addition to I don't remember the numbers for Giving Now, but this is in addition to that event that happened just a few months prior.
Absolutely. Another number that I really wanted to make sure to share, this one I think is the first time that I've seen Giving Tuesday release a national average of repeat donors versus new donors, but it's a question I've gotten a lot in the past of, should I be striving for all of my donors on Giving Tuesday to be new donors, or should most of them be? And so looking at all of the campaigns that shared information with the national study, and that really doesn't come from like nonprofits submitting their data specifically, but it comes from PayPal sharing data and GiveGab sharing data and Classly sharing data and Blackbaud and all those providers that are actually the ones taking the donations. They have data sharing agreements with the National Giving Tuesday folks so that they can really understand what type of giving activity is out there. That's one of the reasons I always read their reports and want to share the most interesting numbers with folks. And so this one really stood out to me, that 75% of donors now on Giving Tuesday are actually repeat donors. So just helping folks to kind of place what your expectations are for your own campaign. All right. Some of you may have seen this list before. This is kind of our baseline for success. This year is my 5th year working on Giving Tuesday. We've been collecting and refining this baseline for success since I started back in 2017. And it's been really interesting to me how consistent it has been. Things have been refined. So like we used to, for the social media posts, we used to specifically say like so many of them should be on Facebook and so many of them should be on Twitter. And now, you know, we've got Instagram and TikTok, and I think some young folks are still using Snapchat a fair amount. That one's really hard to do advertising on, but the opportunities have expanded. So we really don't parse that out into which particular social media you should be using, but we do know that the folks that have posted an average of 15 social media posts about their Giving Tuesday campaign in the week leading up to Giving Tuesday, those are the folks that consistently show high success for their Giving Tuesday campaigns. Public announcements, this one has stayed rock solid in all of the data that we've collected over the last 5 years. Public announcements of campaigns should be 2 to 4 weeks ahead of Giving Tuesday. If you've already announced it, no problem, but really be sure to make sure that message is going out to your key donor opportunity pool. So like whether you're targeting the public, if you're targeting volunteers, especially if you're trying to get board participation. We know that a lot of nonprofits have used Giving Tuesday as kind of a springboard to get all of their board members to be making donations. That's a really great sign of support. It also feeds really well if you're applying for grant applications. We know that having 100% participation in board donations is a really strong signal to grant makers. So you've got kind of multiple layers for success on that one. Sending out 3 to 4 emails on Giving Tuesday, that one has stayed pretty consistent, but we've kind of refined this asterisk at the end to say the 3 to 4 emails on Giving Tuesday itself should typically not be to board members, and I would also add major donors. Going back to what I mentioned in the beginning, we know that the vast majority of folks that are giving on Giving Tuesday tend to be younger and tend to be smaller donations. And so board members, folks that have been engaged for a long time. Hopefully you do have young people on your board, but people that are already on nonprofit boards are those folks that typically are getting emails from multiple nonprofits. And so we've seen a lot of feedback from board members, including our own Forefront board members, of saying, I don't want 100 emails on Giving Tuesday. So we wanted to share that information out with the community, just to make sure that we're really trying to refine those audiences. Engaging 3 or more peer-to-peer fundraisers. I'm going to leave that because Lily's going to dig in a little bit later. So feel free, if you have questions about peer-to-peer fundraising, to throw those in the chat or hold on to them until we talk about that more. And then also setting a goal for dollars that does not end in a 0. We did a really pretty intensive data collection and study in 2017 and 2018 with hundreds of nonprofits across Illinois about what goals they set and what they accomplished. I have some other slides on this if we really want to dig in, but for the sake of being able to focus on what your priorities are, for now, I'll just say that goals that have a tangible connection. So if you can say our dollar amount relates specifically to transporting 10 seniors to 3 events, and that is, $674. Or if you can say the art supplies for this specific program for 6 months cost $6,342. Those really tangible, specific numbers resonate so much better with donors and really, really encourage them to make the donation. And oftentimes there's actually some really interesting data. It encourages them to make larger donations than they would have because they can envision what their donation makes a difference for. So setting those dollar amounts, if your goal is dollars, making sure that it's not a number that ends in 0. The last thing I'll say about that before we move on is that when we first did the study in 2017, the most common goal amount set was $10,000. And if you set a goal of $10,000, you were as likely to succeed or to have $0 raised because it's such an arbitrary number. It doesn't mean anything to folks. It doesn't elicit that I can help with that feeling. And so if we can set those dollar amounts that do connect to what folks can help with, what they can provide, it just makes such a stronger impression for our donors who are trying to comb through all of the needs that they're hearing about on Giving Tuesday. All right, so that was a lot. I'm going to pause for a moment, see if we have questions about these baseline for success items before we move on to the next one. Take a look at the chat here. Yeah, we got a question about giving an example of a goal that's effective. So I mentioned the art supplies for 6 months. We had, I'm trying to think what I have pictures of from campaigns later. I don't think I have this one in my slides later, but one I remember actually outside of Illinois. I think this was a Florida campaign I was talking to, but they were talking about getting kids involved in after school activities. And these were kids that were in a community that were not riding the bus to and from school. They were mostly walking, but their walk from school to home was almost 45 minutes. And so what they did was they got bicycles. Their campaign for Giving Tuesday was to get bicycles for all of the kids that were participating in the after school programs so that it wouldn't take them so long to get home after the program. And so I don't remember exactly the number of bicycles they were going for, but it was pretty big. It was like 30 or 40 bicycles that they were trying to buy. And obviously it was real life kids that they were getting them for. So they had specific sizes they needed. And the campaign was so cool because as the day went on, as they got dollars, they partnered with a bike shop. And so they would actually go and on camera purchase each bike as they got the dollars all day long. So they were constantly putting out this new content. And they went way over their goal because people were so excited about participating. But it was, you know, it really created a very concrete, I can help with that. I can get this bicycle. And folks knew that they didn't have to donate, you know, $100 or $200 to buy a bike, that their $15 would contribute to getting a bike to a kid. I hope that helps. I see there's a comment in the chat. Sarah says, we usually have some kind of matching challenge during Giving Tuesday. What other examples would you recommend? Yeah, matching challenges are so successful. The Coleman Foundation, which has been a really strong partner of Forefronts and a great supporter of Giving Tuesday for years and years, they did some really great research. They partnered, I should remember which university. I want to say it was Texas A&M. But anyway, they partnered with academic researchers. So it was like super high quality data. And they did an analysis to take a look at if they offered a 50%, so like 50 cents on the dollar match, a $1 to $1 match, or a $2 to $1 match. So all these different levels of impact, and to see like what motivated donors the most. What was most fascinating from that data, and they had, I mean, the report was enormous. It was like 200 pages long. But the thing that I thought was really amazing about it was it did not matter how much your match was, whether it was even 50 cents. I think they later even did some smaller amounts, but just the idea, because like, who doesn't like getting a deal? I like getting a sale. And this is almost like getting a deal on your donation. And that doesn't sound very good phrased that way. But when you think about it in the opposite of, well, when I make a $1 donation, they actually get more than that. So it's worth my money. It's impact. It's the word I want here. It's doubling my impact or tripling my impact or whatever. But again, it didn't really matter how many dollars were in the match, just having the match inspired folks to make more donations. And that can be set up with folks that you know are donating. So that's a really great way to engage either board members or existing, if you have kind of major donor folks that you've worked with for a while, because they get to also feel like their donation makes a bigger impact. Because they know that they're inspiring more folks to give to the organization. So I would say for the matching amount, any dollar amount can be really successful. See a couple of more comments here. Oh, Lily's posting articles. Awesome. Thank you so much.
I shared the results and you were right. It was Texas A&M. So
yes,
if anybody really wants to dig into that beast of a study, you can check it out here.
Awesome. Great.
Sarah also asked if is matching considered peer-to-peer fundraising?
That's a great question. It is separate. So because peer-to-peer fundraising at its most basic, and I'm stepping on Lily's toes a bit here, but it's worth repeating because it's great stuff. Peer-to-peer fundraising is the classic example is a 5K. So it's me saying, I'm going to do a thing and I'm going to ask my friends and family to support me in doing that. So I'm asking my peers. And with a match, hopefully you're inspiring folks you may have never even met before to be making donations. So that's kind of why we separate those two out as a match versus peer-to-peer. But I'm going to hold because Lily has a lot more detail to share on that one. These are such great questions. Thank you all for participating. All right. I'm not seeing anything else come in at the moment, so let's move right along. Oh, this is one of my favorite parts to share today. Timelines for communication. So of course, we've got a much longer timeline depicted here than what we have remaining before Giving Tuesday. But just to kind of give the big picture, if you're able to start 1 to 3 months ahead of time, doing kind of that background work for Giving Tuesday, that's when, you know, you're building up kind of your infrastructure internally, your plan, your champions and your stakeholders. It's all kind of the background work. And that goes all the way up through just a few weeks before the date of your giving day. For us, we're talking about Giving Tuesday. And then that's when you really start the launch. That's the public announcement, updates and activity. Those are those kind of social media posts leading up to the day of, and you're increasing your frequency as you get closer and closer. So we talked about having 15 posts in the week leading up. You know, the 2 or 3 weeks out, you might just have 2 or 3 posts. Of course, every organization is different and you know your own, but these are kind of the averages statewide, just to give you a benchmark to think about. So one of the things when we hosted a statewide campaign for Illinois, we partnered with GiveGab. And while we don't officially have a partnership with them anymore, I do really love the free resources they put out for the nonprofit community. So I still like to share those because they're free. So this is a relatively new one that they've released, is a year-round breakdown of communications. And I really love how that feeds into the conversation of digital giving year-round. So they've got some great pieces. I'll actually share. And Lily, since I'm sharing my screen, I can't share the link. If you are able to grab the link, that would be super. If not, we'll post it at the end. But in the year-round guide, it has a 12-week timeline for success that specifically focuses on getting ready for Giving Tuesday. Of course, you could adjust that for any giving day around the year. Then they branch out and talk about, you know, the plans, getting ready, what to do for the big day itself. 1 to 2 weeks after, that's a lot of the kind of, you know, data management and collecting metrics to see whether you were successful and what you might want to change for the next year. And then the next few sections, and you'll be hopefully hearing from us for a follow-up in the winter time, in between that 1 month and 3 months after. Those sections really talk about stewardship and opportunities for keeping those first-time donors engaged. The other piece that they have, this one has been around for a while, and I think I also have a link for that to share, is they have a standalone piece. This one's a little bit older, as I mentioned. It's 8 weeks before getting started. And of course, I know it's less than 8 weeks now, but you can still use the 3 to 4 weeks ahead of the giving day. And what I really love about this is it has a whole list of options and specific ideas. And campaigns can take a look at this and you can say, oh, I can easily accomplish that one, and put it on your list of things. Or you can say, you know what, that's a great idea, but it's too much for this year. I'll do it next year. So it's a really great framework to take a look at. And it also gives you these awesome columns of who are the owners of it. So, you know, hopefully, even if you're a development team of one, you can still reach out and see, you know, are there board members that are interested in supporting? Are there other staff members that have capacity just to support for the day of? Are there volunteers at your organization that have been engaged for a long time and they might be interested in a slightly different way of engaging? So I really like those owner, who's in charge of each individual task, and that follow-up of keeping track of the status. Great. Ooh, okay. Before we go on to peer-to-peer fundraising, any questions about these communication resources? I'm seeing, and I've had this trouble, the PDF link is not showing up as a link, but if you type that into, you know, Google or whatever search engine you use, you should it should pop up as the first one.
I've been trying to grab the link, but I can't, I can't get it to share for some reason. Maybe while I'm talking, Susie, you can grab it.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, not seeing any questions on the communications calendar, so we can always come back to it. If something pops into your head, feel free to throw that in the chat, but I will pass it to Lily for peer-to-peer fundraising.
Thank you. So peer-to-peer fundraising is probably a phrase that you've heard before. And if this isn't your first Giving Day or Giving Tuesday, you might have even engaged peer-to-peer fundraisers or fundraising champions, as they're often called. This is simply when you ask individuals to serve as ambassadors or fundraisers on your behalf, and either through email, social media, or other networks of influence, that they advocate on your behalf and typically raise dollars or help you meet your Giving Day goals. This is becoming an increasingly popular strategy. It's very successful with younger donors who are on social media platforms specifically, and are using those as ways to connect and build their own awareness around causes and events that are happening in their communities and even globally. And it's really useful as a strategy because it provides an element of trust. So you can see here that each peer-to-peer fundraiser on average brings 4 new donors. And this is because one of the strongest elements of this strategy is that element of trust. I'm reaching out to people I have a relationship with that you might not have already. And we can then kind of bypass the first steps of that stewardship process, make that immediate connection, even with a small dollar amount or a small engagement, and then use that to build more long-term sustainable relationships. In addition to helping you grow your donor base and your general awareness among different demographics, organizations who had 3 or more active, this means individuals who are actively fundraising on their behalf on Giving Tuesday or as part of their Giving Tuesday campaign, saw a 20% growth in dollars raised. And according to Mobile Causes 2020 donor data report, the average peer-to-peer fundraiser raised $634 in 2020. So this isn't just an opportunity for you to meet new donors. You have somebody fundraising. It's fundraising you don't have to do. I think that was my favorite phrase somebody said. It's also a really great way to engage current supporters in new ways. So if you're thinking about who your peer-to-peer fundraisers might be, look at your most engaged volunteers. Look at non-typically fundraising staff members who are really passionate about some of the programmatic or impact work that you're having. Look at the people who you've impacted or that your work influences. These can be some of your biggest advocates and champions. And by providing a platform for them to solicit for donations on your behalf, you might even be giving them a chance to raise dollars and have a financial impact that they might not be otherwise able to offer. So peer-to-peer fundraising is being seen more recently as a more accessible way to invite a broader donor base to support the organization. Because if I don't have financial resources to give, but I understand the need and value of financial resources, I can use my social influence and my why, the reason I support the organization, my story, to help drive dollars from other places or engagement or materials, whatever it is that you're looking for. So it builds brand awareness, it can engage new donors, and it's just a great way to bring current supporters closer to the organization. Susie, can we move on to the next slide, please? Thank you. Just a testimonial here. Tiffany Blast, director of the Schuyler Health Foundation, shared her experience using peer-to-peer fundraising to rally more awareness and support during the Cayuga Giving Day. And you can see here, utilizing peer-to-peer fundraising for our Giving Day not only allowed us to engage key stakeholders, such as our board of directors, it allowed us to greatly expand the reach of our cause far beyond expectations. Our mission came directly from those who care the most, those having a personal and direct interest in our success. And that really is the key to finding and activating and mobilizing peer-to-peer fundraisers, is to find those who have a personal and direct interest in the campaign, in your organization, right, in your mission as a whole, and then helping them articulate and share that stories with others. And we had some questions earlier about peer-to-peer. So just want to pause here and see if any of those are still lingering. We can definitely dive deeper into some of the planning and preparations for peer-to-peer fundraising, if that's something that you're interested in, or you're still trying to figure out for your campaign this year. All right, well, if you think of anything, can you share any pros and cons of Facebook fundraising? I think this is one of our most asked questions as we go throughout this series. The pros of Facebook is that Facebook fundraising is that it's really easy for anybody to use. It's automatically integrated into the system. You don't have to go to a third-party site to process your payment. Right, and it all happens on that platform. So I think especially for mid, 30 to 50 age range of who is becoming more and more active on Facebook, maybe even more than 30 and under, who've kind of moved over to like TikTok and Snapchat or Instagram. It's really easy. You don't have to navigate a bunch of different spaces. So it's user-friendly. And it feels like a trusted platform, right? We all know, well, I don't know about right now, but generally speaking, Facebook is a known name. So when you see that, if you come across a friend who's using it, click a button, it's easy. The real cons, in my opinion, of Facebook fundraising is that it makes it more difficult for that stewardship element. You don't really have control over the process. You don't typically have control over branding or messaging unless your fundraisers are reaching out to you beforehand and asking for those materials or templates. They don't typically share donor information, and they definitely don't share contact information. So it's harder for you to create that those pathways right after the fact, which I know we're going to continue to talk about as we move on. But right, how you take first-time donors who are giving you $25, $10, $100, and turn them into lifelong supporters and major givers. So if part of your goal for Giving Tuesday is to develop new relationships and start to steward long-term donors, then Facebook might not be good. If you're just looking to raise money and you're not really focusing on that cultivation or the recurring relationship, it might be an option. I'll add one other potential con, and I haven't had this experience, but I have heard from others, and please, if those of you in the conversation, if you have anything you want to share about your experience with Facebook, please do. I've heard from other organizations that we've worked with that sometimes the timing on when you get your funding can be quite frustrating with Facebook as well. It's not usually right away. I know organizations that have waited 6 months, sometimes to a year, before ever seeing a check that was related to a Facebook fundraiser or a campaign that was that utilized Facebook directly. So Those are just things to weigh. Not to say don't use Facebook. There are plenty of the GiveGab 2021 year-round communication guide is not a working link. Oh, yeah, sorry about that. We realized that it didn't link right away. We will try and add that for you before the conversation closes today. And apologies, I thought you were going to talk about GiveGab. What I was going to say is that there are plenty of free platforms that are available to you that can function and create a pretty similar user experience and do integrate with social media platforms like GiveGab, like Give Lively, Give Butter, I'm sure to give something. So it just kind of depends on the time that you have and really what you're looking for. And I do see some comments in the chat here as well. I'd like to lift those up if I can scroll up to them. Sarah said we had a poor experience with a Facebook fundraiser a couple of years back for all of these reasons. It can be frustrating. Luke also shared that happened to us. We got inconsistent totals and waited months for a lump sum, which didn't match what we were expecting to receive. Oh man. Should board members be engaged for peer-to-peer fundraising? I think absolutely, unless they have a different superpower. And I just mentioned that if you've got a board member who, I'm trying to think of who is a graphic designer, or you really want to pull in on other things, maybe they're not the best choice. But absolutely, I think board members are a great place to start. And peer-to-peer typically happens on social media, but any peer-to-peer ask can fit within a peer-to-peer campaign. And so this can happen via email. If you've got board members more comfortable with email, it can happen over the phone. It can happen one-to-one. It's a little harder to track and to do what we call gamify, so you can add maybe competitions or see how much is being raised in real time. But absolutely, I think board members are a great place to start when you're thinking about who should be fundraising in your peer-to-peer campaign. And you could even make a competition out of it. I work with an organization whose board competes for most dollars raised on their peer-to-peer campaign, and we have a trophy and a t-shirt that they get to carry around at board meetings for the year until the next year. So it's pretty fun.
I'll say one other thing on Facebook before letting that one go is I will admit 3 or 4 years ago, I used to tell folks that I was giving advice to about Giving Tuesday. I would actively say not to use Facebook. And I've changed my tune on that a little bit just because there are still a lot of folks donating on there. Interestingly and frustratingly, they are the only platform that does not share data with Giving Tuesday. So as far as we know, the largest single source of payment transactions is PayPal over any other. But the hunch is that it might actually be Facebook. They just don't share data. So for that reason alone, I these days say both and. Because yes, there are a lot of frustrations with it, but if there's an opportunity to get general operating dollars that can support your organization, I would not turn that down, even with the frustrations that do go with it. So, every organization has to make the decision that's best for them, but given all of the information we have access to, that's what we share. Did get another message in the chat. Versus associate board members, success seems to vary in speaking with other orgs. L. Smith, can you clarify that a little bit? Are you talking about like board engagement versus associate board engagement, or are you talking about the dollar amount sent? Board versus associate board? Okay, great. Yeah, absolutely. And obviously not every organization has an associate board. So that's why we usually talk about the board as kind of our primary target audience. For many organizations that do have an associate board, it does tend to be younger folks. And so that can be a really ideal fit. I know lots of organizations that do engage their associate board in Giving Tuesday specifically as peer-to-peer fundraisers, just because they're, generally speaking, more active on social media, more comfortable with it. So yeah, I think it definitely depends on the organization, on your group of folks individually. I'll say, a couple of notable exceptions. I know some organizations that their focus with their associate board is really heavily on advocacy and not on fundraising. So obviously for them, throwing out Giving Tuesday as an opportunity to folks that are typically thinking about policy work and advocacy work, it would be really kind of a weird transition. So obviously that one's not a good fit for them. So really thinking about who the individuals are on your associate board versus your regular board. I will also say I've seen a couple of organizations that have done some really fun, just kind of tongue-in-cheek sort of competitions between the board and the associate board. Since board members tend to be more established, having dollars to dollars might not always be successful, but having like the number of donations or the number of people engaged or the number of social media posts. There are different ways that you can do it. It can be really fun to create trophies for folks, like Lily was saying. I know even at Forefront for our staff, we weren't asking folks to make posts for donations to Forefront specifically, just to support nonprofits across the state generally. And so we had the highly caffeinated award for whoever made the earliest post within that 24-hour period. I think it definitely went to somebody on our staff with insomnia who was up at 3 o'clock in the morning, but it was just a silly kind of thing. They got a coffee mug and like a $5 gift certificate. But they probably had that coffee mug on their desk, and it kept it front of mind. So there are just different ways that you can engage. I hope that's helpful. If you want to, okay, awesome, great. I was going to say, if you want a different question or a more specific question, we're happy to keep digging in on that topic.
Well, I did, Susie, something you said did bring something up, this idea of like some associate boards, right, have that particular focus of advocacy versus fundraising. So when you're thinking about if you haven't decided to engage in peer-to-peer fundraising, or you're not quite sure which groups to reach out to, anchor yourself back on your goals, and not just your Giving Tuesday goals, but think about organizational goals. What are some strategic goals that you have? And is this an opportunity to lift up and advance some of those? So if part of your goals for the year was to increase board fundraising, for example, and you haven't been successful so far, maybe this is an opportunity to do that. And you can connect that to that larger goal. If the goal was to get board members to be more comfortable sharing their stories, maybe, like Susie just said, it's not a direct ask, but maybe it's craft your story and share that, or just getting them comfortable using social media if you have an older board. So think back to what, just anchor yourself in your goals, and then think about which strategies are actually going to help advance those. Any other thoughts that people want to share about their experience with peer-to-peer fundraising, or I suppose anything we've talked about up to this point?
I'm also going to go ahead and share these additional topics. So there's a lot here. We're almost certainly not going to be able to cover all of them. But these are some things that we immediately have resources on, and we sometimes get questions about. So we wanted to put that out there. So this is the Choose Your Own Adventure portion of our program today. So if there's a topic on here that particularly interests you, again, feel free to take yourself off mute and let us know, or type it into the chat. And if there's something that's not on the list, we're open to that as well. A copy of the chat. That is tricky in the version of Zoom that we use. Is Dottie, is there a specific piece that you're looking for? Is it the links?
Yes, the links.
We are very happy to send out a follow-up email to everybody that was registered today with the links that we use. So hopefully that will fill that need.
Other callers at this time. Please remain on the line and your call will be answered in the order it was received.
Good, Emily, I'd be interested in hearing more on storytelling and or captions.
All right.
And then another for storytelling, and then engaging new donors.
Cool. All right, let's scan for a second here. All right, so I have a few slides here on storytelling, and we're starting with this slide of daffodils. I'm personally a big fan of time in the garden. I think this is even a picture of my actual garden from 2 springs ago. So I just finished, if you're not a gardening person, bulbs for spring flowers, a lot of them go in the fall. So I just finished planting over 100 bulbs this last weekend, and I have no idea whether they're going to come up. Maybe the squirrels are going to eat them. Maybe the weather's going to be really bad. I don't know what the result is going to be, but I'm telling myself this story that if I put this time in now, if I invest my a little bit of actual dollars and mostly time and getting my hands in the dirt, that next spring I'll have pretty flowers like this to look at in my backyard. So that's a story that I'm telling myself, that my investment is going to be worth it. So when we're thinking about captions, whether it's, things that are happening in our day-to-day life, whether it's campaigns for digital giving, we're trying to make that connection, going back again to my comment in the beginning of the I can help with that feeling. So this is just a stock photo, but the quote is real, from someone saying, I'm working from home with my children are home from school. So this was a little bit earlier in 2020. But I can't help think of the nearly 20,000 children in Los Angeles County who are in and out of foster care today. And this person was using their day-to-day experience to relate it to this nonprofit work and asking people to support the foster care program, and specifically a nonprofit that was supporting children in foster care. So it's just a really short post, and the end of it did have like a link to the donation page. But just trying to convey that little bit, thinks about where I am right now, where my kids are right now, or maybe my nieces or my grandchildren, and connecting it to the feeling of what about those kids that are in foster care and maybe they don't have the stability and maybe they need a little bit of extra support. So it just really brings it home. Got a couple more examples here I wanted to share. Move some windows around so I can see all of them. So this one goes back to that idea of really tangible gifts. So I apologize. I know that the text is a little bit hard to read here because it's gray on white background. But this one was an organization that worked with individuals, and they were really pulling out what specific dollar amounts could do. And these were pretty large. Of course, it could be changed to fit whatever size, but they had on the high end, this $3,000 amount can fund an entire rescue journey and provide resettlement assistance for North Korean refugees. All the way over to, on the right-hand side, $180 supplies can provide books and school supplies for one resettled North Korean student in our program. So it's just giving those really clear examples that even in describing what the dollar amount gives, it creates that kind of story that somebody can think about and can really visualize what those dollars make the impact. This is a really interesting example. This is a story that actually started 14 years ago, I believe. So I'm trying to remember all of this kind of off the top of my head, but there was an organization, and I think they were actually both based in Rhode Island, I want to say, and they did work with identifying young students that had vision issues and then supporting them to get their vision corrected, because they knew that if kids are going to learn in school successfully, they've got to be able to see the resources in the classroom. Obviously 14 years ago, we weren't doing virtual classes. So this is a story about one specific child who was identified and needed support to actually have surgery. So she didn't just need glasses, she needed surgery to correct some issues. And so the first year they did the campaign, it was raising money for this one particular individual child. And they had such a strong response that they decided to follow up with her the next year. And they had such a strong response the second year that they kept doing follow-ups, and they ended up going all the way. I think the last year of the campaign officially was last year when she started college. And so it followed her all the way, all of the different ways that the support from that one childhood interaction had helped change and shape her life all the way through getting into college. And so that individual story fed their organization in a really substantial way for 14 years. All right, that, I think we did have a vote for strategies beyond social media, but I want to pause for a minute for stories that people connect to. I know that was still relatively brief, and see if there were specific questions folks wanted to dig into before we move on.
Susie, I did want to highlight, I missed an earlier vote. It was on storytelling, but specifically asking about kind of stories within the ongoing COVID context, and how or if stories need to change or do change.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm paging through here trying to find that specific one. Oop.
Well, I'll jump in while you're navigating through those, just to say that in my experience, the basic principles are still the same, right? You need to have the why, the impact, how the role the donor plays. Right, Susie, I love that framework of I can help with that. But I think what they're seeing a little bit more of a shift in is honesty, being honest about what your needs are, not coming from a place of a negative position or a desperate position, but being honest about the dollars that you need, about this, if you're struggling, or if the people that you're impacting are experiencing new challenges that you're struggling to meet, to be honest and to be open with donors. And Susie, I think you said this earlier, right? If they don't know what you need, they don't know how to show up. So I mention that because I know sometimes we want, particularly from the nonprofit perspective, we want to show ourselves from a position of strength, and certainly we should do that when we can. And if we think funders are watching, we definitely don't want to seem like we're feeble or weak. But again, if donors don't know that your organization has a need, and an urgent one, they can't show up for you. So trying to balance between that help us now, or or we'll close our doors, and a strength-based position, I think, is really the best tactic when we're thinking about either what COVID has done or continues to do. And I'll add to that, use it. That's an 18-month story we all have experienced together. So highlighting the work that's been done, highlighting that how we've come together, how community has shown up, especially on days like Giving Tuesday, where the focus really is on that global, that sense of giving and community and action. This is a story we all share, so we can tell that story too. I would say don't be afraid of it. Haha.
All right. Yes. Thank you, Lily. Those were really, really good points. And I'm going to build on that a little bit now that I finally found the specific slides I was looking for. So yeah, a couple of the things, not a couple, 5 things that have come up specifically to fundraising during COVID. Reevaluating budgets. Many folks have already done this. If you haven't, and honestly, even if you have, it may be time to reevaluate it again. I know we were all really, really hoping this was over back in the summertime, and then Delta variant came in and ruined our summertime plans, and as individuals and as organizations. So even if you have reevaluated, it may be necessary to do it again. I know, speaking from Forefront's program team, we are only making program plans for 6-month increments because things keep changing, and we hope they settle down soon. So being able to, like Lily said, being able to really tell folks, this is what we thought was going to happen this year. This is what actually happened. Here are where our needs are right now. Grant makers need to know that, but also individual donors need to know that as well. Stewarding supporters, again, just being super clear, really authentic in where things are, what's working, what's not working, what your needs are. I'll say, again, just kind of sharing from personal experience. I try when I talk about digital giving and Giving Tuesday to, as frequently as possible, put on my donor hat myself, and think about what my experience is kind of from the other end of things. Last night, I got a call from one of the colleges that I went to, and they were asking for donations. And I will admit, typically I say, my budget's tight. I work for a nonprofit, sorry. And I move on with my day. But their pitch was, we have a specific fund to help students that just need a few more credits to finish their degree, and they've been impacted by COVID, and they don't have the funds to do it. Would you donate to that fund? And I said, yes, because I can imagine, I was living on those student loans to finish my degrees, and it was worth it, but it was hard. And it was something I immediately connected to, and I said, yes, I can help with that. So being just really clear with your donors about what it is that you need in this moment and why it's unique in this moment. Even though we're all sick of talking about COVID, the impacts are still real. Getting creative with fundraising, I have a much more fun, kind of, in my mind, hilarious slide next that I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. We just talked about communicating openly and freely, and then keeping accurate records. I know everyone strives to do that generally, but especially during this time, there are tax relief programs. There's some that have already been implemented, like the PPP and others, and there are other opportunities that maybe still are coming from either government sources or from grant maker collaboratives that are trying to fund folks. So being able to figure out exactly what came in related to COVID, what gaps you had, those are going to be really important in the months ahead. Okay, getting creative with the fundraising. I had a couple of examples that I saw that I was really, I'm going to say delighted by, given the circumstance that we're in the world. So this one, some of you may have seen these, but it was new to me when I did the research of folks selling masks that have your school or your organization logo on it. And so, you know, this is replacing maybe candy bar sales or what other sort of like typical Christmas wrap sales or whatever you might be having for schools and teams and organizations. Some folks are selling masks that have the logo for their organization as a pride opportunity, you know, just dealing with the fact that we still have to be wearing masks in a lot of spaces. Another one that was a little bit more bold and I thought was really interesting, down in this lower right-hand corner, scan for good vibes, is putting that QR code. And I will admit, I have not actually scanned it. So fair warning there. I don't know if that one is a working one, but the concept is that you could have a QR code that goes directly to your donation page and somebody could actually be wearing that and walking around with it. I don't know if I personally would want to wear that one, but it's a very creative idea and it could definitely happen if you've got some quirky staff members or volunteers or board members that would be up for that kind of thing. Virtual book club. This one was a little bit like a readathon. So they were asking for donations before, during, and after their meetings to support the mission that they were all equally interested in. A virtual 5K, I think a lot, sorry, my dog in the background. A lot of organizations have done these virtual 5Ks where you can, you know, run or walk on your own time. Let's see. Okay, so those were the creative pieces. Lily, did you have something you wanted to add in?
I was just going to say, if you did want to scan that for a dose of some good vibes, there it's to a Reddit group of cute animal videos. So I did just try. Laura said, we're considering adding a volunteer option to our giving form to make the giving campaign more inclusive. Do you have any thoughts on this? I personally love that idea, not just because I'm a volunteer coordinator in one of my many hats that I wear, but it absolutely is a way to invite more people into the fold and show them that giving, that you can give not just with dollars, that actions have power, actions have impact. And I think that's excellent. And Susie, I'm sure you've got things to add as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that specifically for Giving Tuesday really gets back to the heart of their motivation for the day, is that it's about generosity. And in a lot of cases that takes the form of dollars, but that's certainly not the be all end all of generosity. So yeah, I think volunteering is fantastic as an option. And I think, yeah, it does really give a great opportunity. I've seen folks do specific ones that are like getting whole families together or getting neighborhoods together. But I think anything that gets people the option to feel connected. Another thing that's very specific about Giving Tuesday itself, and I can't remember the exact percentage on this, but it was really high. I want to say 84, somewhere in the 70 to 80% range of folks that gave on Giving Tuesday said part of their motivation was wanting to be part of something bigger than themselves. They want to feel connected, you know, to that kind of global movement of generosity and goodness. So I think volunteering is a great way to give everybody the option to do that. All right. This page that we've got up right now kind of goes back to what we were talking about making really clear asks specific to COVID right now. laying out exactly how things have changed for your organization. And this vital service piece, the one thing I'll add about that, I think some folks, some organizations I've talked to in the last 18 months have said, you know, I'm an arts organization, or I'm a debate organization. You know, how can I say that I'm vital during this period? And my response would be, anyone who contributes to a strong community and a strong society is vital at this moment. Anything that contributes to us feeling some normalcy, some joy, some happiness, some connection, those are vital right now. The articles that I've read about the mental health impacts of this crisis, even for folks that, you know, have not experienced COVID itself in their friends or family, just the amount of grief and fear that the country, that the world has experienced has been so intense. 1 in 3 Americans are reporting symptoms of depression, anxiety, or other mental health crisis in this time. And so I will again say, any organization that is providing anything that strengthens communities and individuals, that is vital. The one, okay, we've got still talking about, did we have somebody ask about digging in a little bit more on goal setting? Okay, not seeing it. Maybe I imagined that one, but I do see engaging new donors. I'm going to take a moment, stop sharing these slides.
Any questions or thoughts coming up while Susie's pulling the slides up? Are any of you already thinking about these things, or applying some of these questions and strategies to your campaigns?
Ideas for engaging new communities and first-time donors. So we're going to start here with some more data from our friends at Giving Tuesday. So kind of looking at the way in which people participate. One phrase I used earlier is generous people are generous. And you see that again here. It's something that I hear from the Giving Tuesday national team on a regular basis. So looking at all of the folks that engaged in 2020 in Giving Tuesday, 28% gave money, 37% gave in some other way, donating food, clothing drives, other forms of non-monetary giving. 35% did both. That's a huge percentage when you think about the way that people give. And again, opening up those opportunities, like those volunteer opportunities. You know, not everyone needs to collect physical things for their organization, but most organizations can benefit from volunteering in one way or another. That's another thing that also ties into stewardship. Some of the organizations that I've seen be most successful with getting folks to repeat donate is that they follow up and let them know, first of all, how their gift made an impact. You know, it doesn't have to be a personalized email about their specific donation, but it can be, here is the sum total of the result of everybody that gave on Giving Tuesday. These are the goals that we were able to accomplish because of this campaign. And then inviting them and saying, you know what, we know that you're interested in our organization. We have an open house this day, or we have a volunteer opportunity, or we have a showcase of, if we have, youth doing projects, any way for folks to engage in person once it's, once people feel safe doing so in whatever community you're in. But just opening the door for them to be engaged in different ways beyond just giving online. Some other data that I pulled that was really interesting. So we talked about how Giving Tuesday has a tendency to be younger donors. I will say, when we had the statewide campaign in Illinois, so the largest group in terms of just the number of donations, that was the 24 to 35 or so age group. But the largest dollar amount of donations was women over the age of 65. And they were the second largest number of donations. So even though we talk about there are lots and lots of young people, certainly don't discredit the idea that you have folks of every age demographic that are possibly engaging. So you want to think about how those folks are engaging. And so I pulled up these numbers, and some of the ones that I thought were really interesting. You see with both millennials and Gen X that social media is the biggest driver. But when you think about the baby boomer donors, they are first most likely to be inspired by email, but the second largest inspiration is social media. So you still have a lot of folks that are engaged in that way. And the one thing that I also think is really interesting, it's not so surprising anymore, but the preferred way to give, every single category, the preferred way to give is online. So just want to keep that in mind as we're thinking about our digital giving strategies. All right, then a little bit more, a lot of folks use Giving Tuesday to really try to reach younger donors that maybe have never made a donation to their organization before. So thinking about what generally are common concepts among the newest generation of donors. So believing that giving is actually a responsibility is really common. Raised to help others is a sentiment you hear very frequently from young donors about why they're giving for the first time. And they actually have one of the strongest percentages of trust in the nonprofit services that they see provided in their community. So those are thoughts that drive a lot of young donors. And this one digs a little bit into the weeds, but when we're thinking about young donors, thinking about how they donate and where they're active. Are there platforms that they're available? Venmo, if you're not familiar with that, is an online app that you can use to make payments. I downloaded it years ago and it just kind of sat there. But in the last year with the pandemic, I've used it so much more. When I go to the few times I've been able to go get my hair cut, there's a QR code that I scan to tip my stylist in Venmo, because that way we don't have to have the physical transaction of cash. I've used it for babysitters, and Venmo is now being used by 50 million people. And actually, this is a 2019 number, and I would guess it's significantly higher than that. The app processed $160 billion of payments in 2020. So this is not like a new niche thing. And they recently launched some specific support for nonprofit donations. So I'll also, at the end, and I'll say in the follow-up email, we'll be sure to share these links, not just Venmo, but Apple Pay and Google Wallet. Many folks are more familiar with those, so I didn't really dig into the nuts and bolts of that, but all three of them have specific opportunities for making donations to nonprofits through their app. We'll send those links out in the follow-up if folks want to use that, particularly to connect with younger donors. And then one of the things that I think I myself can also be guilty of is thinking, well, you know, this is a nonprofit that does really amazing work and everybody is going to want to be involved. And so all I have to do is talk about my work and they'll just come running. Probably some of you are rolling your eyes at that because that's not your lived experience. It's not, especially when we're connecting with new communities that we haven't connected with, and whether that's a new neighborhood, a new city, a new demographic, a new racial identity or ethnic identity. If it's a group that you haven't engaged with before, just like building a friendship, you have to build the relationship and the trust first. So taking kind of a step back before engaging new donors in terms of the actual donations is just engaging them in a meaningful way. So some really great ideas that I've seen for that is doing volunteer cleanups, community picnics, just kind of getting to know each other events, depending on the audience that you're trying to connect with, whether it's, again, whether you're connecting with a neighborhood or if you're connecting with folks of a particular racial, ethnic, religious identity. Where is a good starting point? Where does your organization and that community, where do they overlap, and where can you create overlap in relationships? A couple of comments in the chat, so I'm gonna check on those. Okay, so it's a really great question about Venmo. I'll see what I can dig into and see if I can find a better link for the nonprofit donations. And I will say that one's a little bit newer to me as well, so I might need to reach out to some of my colleagues for some more advice.
I do know, I'm not sure generally about Venmo, but I do know if any of you use GiveButter as your platform, they do have a relationship with Venmo, and you can integrate that into your campaign, but I don't have much experience with that as a payment option outside of integration with a paid platform. So yeah, Susie, I'll help to clarify what the options are and what the pathways are to get set up through them.
Awesome, great, thank you. Oh, this one, I'll just talk about this photo really quick because I love the story. This is actually a nonprofit in the UK, but I think there are a couple of similar experiments going on in the States. So the two needs, and this was actually it's a couple of nonprofits that ended up working together. One was working with seniors that were experiencing loneliness and depression and quality of life issues related to that. And the other group was working with young people that were either still students or new in their careers and were having trouble finding affordable housing. And so what these two organizations did was they teamed up, and they had these young people could apply, and there was a whole process that they had to go through and figure out the matchmaking and who would be good. And in some cases it was, you know, one senior person and one young individual living in an apartment or a house together. And sometimes it was, you know, like a mini group home where they had a couple of folks that were older and they had a number of folks that were younger as well, all as roommates. And so it solved these two problems that you would typically not think of it being connected at all. Of you had some engagement and connection for the seniors, and you had a place to live for the young people that were either still in school or new in their careers and couldn't find affordable housing. And so I really loved that idea of unusual ways to intersect, and finding different ways to connect our community and connect our missions. All right. I believe that's the last slide I have on that section. So I will stop my share again. And I'll pull back up the slide we have for additional other topics. But feel free to throw questions into the chat or come off mute, anything that you're thinking about today. One other option I wanted to throw out, we have about a half an hour left in our scheduled time together. If folks are interested in breaking into small groups and doing some brainstorming, talking directly with one another, we're happy to do that as well. So if you're interested in a breakout room to brainstorm with your colleagues, please put that in the chat and we can set that up. Final alternative, we can also end early today and give you some time back in your schedule. We are here for you, however we can be helpful.
Thanks, Sarah. Happy to hear that. Curious about GiveButter. I haven't used GiveButter personally. I've heard pretty good things about them. Like I will say, like any platform that has a freemium option that is free to nonprofits, I think that it does have some limitations. But if you're really just looking for a basic campaign page that you can customize and engage peer-to-peer fundraisers with, and then pool various payment options, I do think that it would be worth looking into and giving it a try. I always say one of the best ways to view Giving Tuesday is as an opportunity to take risks or try something new, to experiment and collect data. So again, if you don't have a platform already, and you kind of want to test it out, it is free. I think this would be a good opportunity to give it a chance and see what you think. It's pretty comparable in my experience to Give Lively and GiveGab. I am not as familiar with their work outside of Giving Tuesday specifically. But if anybody else in the group uses GiveButter or has experience with them, would appreciate your peer insight as well. Any other questions? Things coming up for people? Roadblocks you've hit in your planning, or can you touch a little bit on successful suggested dollar amounts for Giving Tuesday?
Yes, we.
And do you mean, and maybe you mean all of these things, do you mean, sorry about my dog, the mailman's here. Do you mean, dollar amounts for asks, or I'm talking more about setting goals, or all of the above? Can you clarify that a little bit? Dollar amount for asks, especially in the pandemic.
Yeah, so I don't have a slide specifically on your ask amount. A couple of things that I will share on that that we've seen hold true over the years. One is to have multiple ask amounts. There's a lot of good data that giving 3 to 5 options is the best number. Because it's just enough to get people thinking, but it's not too overwhelming. I've seen some folks have like 8 or more different ask amounts, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I have to sit here and read through every single one of these to figure out which one I need to make. Because remember, the vast majority of folks that are making donations are making them from a phone or a tablet. So they're going through it pretty quickly. You want them to be able to get from I'd like to make a donation to my credit card has cleared in as little time as possible. So number one, giving 3 to 5 options. Number 2, I would take a look at what is the most common donation amount that your organization receives. That should be the middle amount. So let's say the most common donation your organization receives is $100. Then from there, if the biggest donation you've ever received, and so obviously I'm talking about a really small organization right now, and that's okay, is $1,000 or $5,000, then you're not going to want your high one to be anywhere near that. So maybe you've got $100, $150, and $50. You always want to have a slightly bigger ask than what is your average ask. Because there's, again, a lot of data that shows that just giving the higher option makes people more likely to choose the second highest option. So even if you have, a $500 reach amount and nobody makes that, you will still likely earn more dollars than if your highest amount was $300, because more people will choose the second highest amount, if that makes sense. If I need to clarify that, I'm happy to. Okay, so number 1, 3 to 5 options. Number 2, your middle option should be what is your most common donation amount for your organization, unless you're based on, a totally different strategy. So if you have a really specific strategy, feel free to ask a specific question, but this is sort of broad strokes, what we've most commonly learned. There's a third thing. Oh, just to make sure that you have a story like that mini story that we talked about earlier for each individual ask amount, that your total goal should be a specific thing, and your 3 to 5 options should each be specific things as well. And it's not necessarily that like my $5 is buying a specific, can of paint or gallon of gas or, hour of electricity or whatever. These are, what's the word I'm looking for? These are symbolic story gifts. So that's why most of the time folks use the language of your $5 can provide blah, 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 blah. Because when you're getting donations, it's really important to honor the intention of the donation itself. But most folks that are collecting on giving days are doing general operating dollars. So it's giving those symbolic gifts, but being clear, not deceptive in what your language is, so that folks know the type of impact that their dollars can make, and not that they are specifically buying a thing. I know that's kind of a fine line to walk. If you haven't experienced that before, again, happy to dig in more. Awesome, great. And then I'll just share these slides since I do have them open. This is for really the dollar amount for the whole organization. I think I mentioned this earlier. These numbers came out of a study that we did in Illinois in 2017, 2018. We haven't seen anything that drastically contradicts this since then. So the piece that you're looking at here, again, it's the dollar amount raised for organizations. So if you can't see the little explanation at the bottom, the blue columns are the average dollars raised for organizations in these budget categories. So at the very bottom on the horizontal axis, you've got the categories are 0 to $99,999. So that is the annual budget of the organization. So roughly speaking, each of these column sets are sizes of organizations. So you've got from organizations that have less than $100,000 average operating budget all the way up to well over $10 million. And that blue column in each of those categories is the average dollars that they actually raised. Then the orange column is the average goal amount set. And so you may see that most of the numbers on here are around that $10,000 number. Again, this is the average because that year, as I mentioned earlier, the vast majority of organizations that set any goal, and you should definitely set a goal, but the vast majority of organizations set a generic $10,000 goal, and it was not very successful because it didn't tie to anything in their work or in their donors' lived experiences. So the next piece that we did, oh, and I definitely want to highlight this. The amount that nonprofits with goals raised above nonprofits without a goal. So again, you definitely want to set some sort of overarching goal, especially if dollars are your primary goal for your campaign, because you're likely to raise, as this says, 68% more than an organization that doesn't set a goal. Whether you meet your goal or not, you're still going to raise far, far more than an organization that doesn't set a goal. So then the next piece that we did, we've looked at the average dollars that organizations actually raised, what their goal amount was, and then we also wanted to pull out the maximum from the data set that we had, which if I remember correctly was around 350 to 400 nonprofits across the state. So it was a pretty big group. You know, the average dollar amount could be far lower. So we didn't want folks to set their goals too low, but we also didn't want folks to set goals that were unrealistic or unlikely to be attained. I've talked to, you know, organizations that had a $100,000 or less than $100,000 budget that said, you know what, I would like in my first year of Giving Tuesday to raise $50,000. Well, I would too, but let's set a goal that's maybe a little bit more realistic. And then if you do hit it, that's a pleasant surprise. So the maximum for our smallest organizations, again, this was the same annual budget categories for each group. For our smallest organizations that had budgets of less than $100,000, that maximum raised that year was $8,682, which is a great amount to raise. So if you can kind of look at that, then we also have on the high end, one of our organizations that was over a $10 million annual budget. One organization raised over $126,000 in just that one day of Giving Tuesday. And the average amount, as you can see, is much, much lower. The average amount for the over $10 million organizations was $14,669. So the reason we pulled these numbers out is that we think most organizations can likely be successful if they set their goal amount somewhere in between that average dollar amount and the maximum dollar amount. It's a pretty wide range. We would love to be able to give you like a golden number for your organization, but it's, you know, before when we first started this, we didn't really know when folks would ask us like, what should I set my goal amount at? And so we really, like I said, we'd love to be able to give you like, this is the number that you can raise. we're not at that point yet, probably never will be, but we can share this is a range that is probably likely to be successful. If you're outside of that range, either on the low end or the high end, you might want to reevaluate what your goal looks like. So again, that's a lot of data and a lot of numbers, and I will pause for any questions. Also noting that we're now about 12 minutes to the hour. And for most folks, the next thing on their agenda is lunch.
I did want to share while you're thinking about any follow-up questions that you might have, Tiered into your question about Give Butter, and if anybody else is curious, I just shared a link to an article that compares about 15 different donation platforms. And it's just kind of a brief overview of what they offer, where their price range is, what their processing fees are, and then provides links if you're curious about learning a little more. So if you just want a quick look, great, see what's out there.
All right. Well, I'm happy to stay on the line for another couple of minutes, but I just want to thank everyone again for being here today. Thank you for the work that you do in the nonprofit community. Thank you for existing as a person in this difficult time, and going back to the very beginning. I hope you all have successful giving campaigns, but I hope that you get some rest today or in the near future.